Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we conclude our journey into the world of William Friedkin, where it started with another collaboration with Tracy Letts, the playwright. Mm-hmm. This time Killer Joe, from a few years after Bug, the film we started with. This is from 2011, and it's a key film in what became known as the McConaissance, the reinvention of Matthew McConaughey as a kind of dramatic actor, someone who was taking darker roles. He spent 10 years as a rom-com guy. There was this whole persona of he had his shirt off on the beach sort of thing. And then this happened, and Mud happened, and Magic Mike happened, and True Detective happened in 2014. And there's this period of 3 years of really different roles for McConaughey. But I think this was the first one, I think. This is the one that shocked people. He's this really, he's a cop, but it's a Friedkin thing we've seen before, the amoral cop. This time he's a cop who performs contract killings.
Did we see this together when it came out?
I don't think we did, but we've definitely seen it before, both of us.
Yeah. I remember being really shocked in a pleasant way, right? Like, I'd gotten in the habit of just going to the pictures, which means that in a way, well, you choose amongst what's available, but actually I wasn't aware who directed it or any of that. I mean, I just went because it looked good and it had Matthew McConaughey in it. And actually, in the first 5 minutes of the film, it's like you're thinking, who did this? Right? Like, it was like so instantly noir and beautiful and shocking and lurid. And so actually, I think, because I've been criticizing Friedkin a lot, and I think it's good to remember that, like, his skill level is still beyond almost anybody else. I mean, there was that moment where it was literally who is this person who directed this, right? Like, it kind of was amazing, really. So I thought it was good to say that now because, I will later be making some of the same criticisms I've been making about Friedkin. I actually think, that you begin to see patterns and limitations as well as these incredible kind of strengths that he's got.
When I first saw it, I remember being kind of blown away in similar ways. And again, it's it's what you say, who made this? Where did this come from? Although I don't know if I knew it was Friedkin at the time, but certainly the focus was on McConaughey. This was, I think popularly as well, this was the film where McConaughey plays a creepy guy, a bad guy, so on and so forth. I remember being really taken by the look of it. It had such a crisp, clean look, and I always remembered the blood on Gina Gershon's face at the end when she's been punched in the face. It's so vibrantly red. It's so bright. Yes. That really stuck with me.
And her eyes are so dark. It looks like a mask.
Yeah. The whole look of her, but especially the blood, really stuck in my mind. And I came back today and I was like, yeah, God, wow, that's the same, like, I remember it so vividly. I think there's something we've not given Friedkin enough credit for throughout this season, which this film made me think of, is his skill with casting and working with actors. I think this is a brilliantly cast film. I can't think of a film we've seen where people have been miscast, and there's an element here of getting the trust of your actors. What he gets Gina Gershon to do towards the end with the chicken leg.
But that's Gina Gershon. That's almost like typecasting. Okay, I didn't find that, it's Gina Gershon of Bound and Showgirls and, I love her. I think she's great, but she's always been known for doing those daring things. I actually don't think it's particularly daring of Friedkin. And actually, I would disagree with you because, the thing about Friedkin and actors is, so I kind of agree with you, but actually, I think there's something always a little off, and I wondered if it didn't have to do with ego, because one of the things that you begin to notice about Friedkin as we went through his career is how rarely he casts stars. Yeah? The people who we now think of as stars weren't quite when he used them, right? So people like Gene Hackman or Ellen Burstyn, they were I mean, they were names, but they weren't yet box office stars. And actually, I often think that, you know, his films miss out by the absence of them. And when he does cast them, the films get enriched. I mean, I can't help but think of, like, you know, people like Francisco Raval in Sorcerer, yeah, who's much more alive and magnetic and so on than the real star, who's Roy Scheider, right? Yeah. So, and actually, I think this film greatly benefits from having Matthew McConaughey. Yeah. And I'm not quite happy with the performance of the brother. Yeah.
Emil Hirsch.
Yeah. So like Roy Scheider, he's not bad. He's good. Yeah. But, you know, that's a great role. Somebody else could have, you know, made it really alive and vibrant and, yeah, all the things that it's kind of meant to be. And it almost is, but not quite, actually.
He's the weakest member of the main cast. And I think there's a reason he's not become the big star that he was kind of supposed to be, I think, for a while. He was also the main guy in Speed Racer. I think it was around the same... I think Speed Racer was maybe 2008. He was supposed to be one of the kind of next big things. And I think this film demonstrates why he wasn't. He doesn't have the magnetism.
Yes. So I think your thing about casting...
But I think he's the only bum note in this. I mean, this is a brilliantly cast film. I think Juno Temple brings something really magical to it. You know, it's interesting. She like I was saying, you know, the film has the amoral cop sort of thing of Friedkin, and Juno Temple has something of the innocence of Linda Blair at the beginning of The Exorcist in this as well. But she has this darker side, and she you know, there are moments in the film where she says something off kilter, and it surprises even Killer Joe. And Killer Joe is so in control of all his situations, and when he can be perturbed by her, you know, that's a really kind of special moment. And she has this little laugh, she has these looks, you wonder what's going on inside her head. She's
wonderful. Gina Gershon is amazing. I very much liked the actor who played Ansel, the husband.
Thomas Hayden Church.
Yeah, whom you know, maybe I should know, but actually I don't. He's a familiar face, but I can't remember from where. And I think he does an incredible job of playing dumb, yeah, which is not easy to do, you know.
Yeah, without becoming a sort of stereotype or a caricature, he feels a real person. I agree. I love him in it.
Yeah. So, and actually, I wrote a little blurb, which I'll send you to include in our podcast, of Killer Joe when it first came out. And I wasn't impressed with Matthew McConaughey, you know, as much as other people. As you said, this film came out right in the middle of the McConaissance, and my ungenerous view was that the roles were better than he was. Yeah. So that, you know, he was getting praise for choosing the roles rather, you know, than his performance in them. And actually seeing the film again, I think I was very ungenerous because I thought he was fantastic this time around. Yeah, he had a real stillness, and you know, and he seemed coiled, and he reminded me very much of Robert Mitchum in Night of the Hunter. I thought he was much better than I initially thought, seeing the performance again.
Yeah, he carries an awful lot of threat with him. He brings the film alive. I mean, we mentioned before, actually, we were talking about Friedkin and stars in one of the previous podcasts. Maybe you were talking about Roy Scheider in Sorcerer, because Roy Scheider had just done Jaws at the time, so he was as big as he would be, really. And still, he's not a kind of killer star. But McConaughey was in this. You know, he'd been huge for 10 years, and it was such a surprise and a kind of shock to people that he was doing something like this. And that's one of the reasons the film was a draw. Was the film... I think the film was successful. No, not that successful.
The film was a terrible flop.
Yeah, it was. A budget of 10 million, and it made half that at the box office. Not successful, but critically very, very well received.
Yes, I mean, you know, now when we get these box office statistics, I think everybody should be a little bit wary. You know, so if you're looking at classic Hollywood and they give you the figures, you can easily tell whether the film was a success or not by the theatrical box office figure. But right now, I mean, this could, for example, be a film that is wildly successful, and we don't know. I mean, you know, the film could be a relative failure at the theatrical box office, but had really taken off, you know, on DVD or, you know,
streaming
or on other platforms, right? I mean, and often the theatrical release is really just used as a publicity launch for the film's subsequent afterlife on all the other platforms. I would be surprised if this is a film that has not made money on a $10 million budget. Because,
eventually they all kind of do, and it's certainly, it's one of those that grew in sort of stature. People, I think, discovered more and more after. That only tells half the story, you're right. Something about this film that I think speaks to Friedkin more widely, which again I only really thought about when I was watching this, is how rarely it feels like Friedkin is letting other people make decisions for him. You know?
Yes.
Like his films kind of come out the way that he wants them to, I think.
I think so.
This was an NC-17, and you can imagine the pressure to cut it, because an NC-17 is kind of a death sentence at the box office. And it would have destroyed the film to make that accommodation, to make any kind of accommodation towards that. Like it's a violent, grim, very shocking film towards the end. We can maybe talk about the chicken scene in a bit, but like it's of a piece, you know.
I mean, I think there are things worth discussing about Friedkin's work in general, because I think certain things get highlighted. I mean, he's attracted to the lurid, to the seedy. Not always with the greatest depth, you know. I mean, I think there's something kind of false about this film, or cheap, like I think it lacks depth, and I think that's true of many Friedkin films. It's actually one of those films that is taking itself very seriously, but actually I'm not sure that the material or the way it's being filmed warrant it. He's definitely attracted to the taboo. I mean, this is a film in which a 12-year-old girl is basically bought, for sex and, gotten pregnant and so on. It's really out there material, So clearly, you put this next to The Exorcist with that, a stabbing with the crucifix, and you get a pulp, lurid, sensationalist sensibility. It's not there to discover any great truths or anything. It's there to like make you jump out of your seat. That's, to me, is kind of a weakness when you see it kind of so recurrently. He's also got this thing about endings, about never satisfying the audience or denying the audience the pleasure in an ending. This is better handled than most, but it's still there, So I think spoilers, but at the end of the film, you kind of don't know what's going to happen, but you kind of do, like she cocks the gun, right? But you don't see anything happening.
Cuts to black. The thing about the ending is it has that similar feeling to Jade, I think. Where I was saying about Jade, the very kind of final few shots of that film, the final scene, kind of turns things on their head. There's a huge revelation at the end of Jade, and then a twist in terms of how the main character is kind of being treated and so on. And it comes really from out of nowhere and leaves you with a kind of pit in your stomach to some degree. And it's just, it feels unjustified. And like it's there just to get a shock reaction. This has a very similar thing going on right at the very end with the thing about she says she's pregnant, we're having a baby, and he's elated, we're having a baby, and then does she shoot him, cuts to black, and it's just like, oh, what? You're left with and then you walk out dazed into the world, and you end up going, as we've said with so many Friedkins, what does it mean? What was the point? What was I supposed to, was I supposed to get anything deeper than the shock? Because you've been saying all along he's so interested in the underbelly of society and the dark side of way humans behave, and it's absolutely true. It's impossible to ignore that. That's where so many of his films are set and how many of the characters kind of behave. But I'm always left asking, okay, but is it more than just an interest? Or what is the nature of the interest? Is it just that this is titillating? It's exciting to see. He likes to excite his audiences. He's excited by it himself. But, is there an attempt to interrogate why humans behave like this, why we have this side to us, that kind of thing. I never feel it. I never feel it in these films.
Yes. No, I don't either.
And maybe you could be generous and say it's about getting us to enjoy what we're seeing and then ask it of ourselves, why did I enjoy this so much? But I think that would be being too generous, frankly.
Yes. I mean, the thing about the films is I think they look beautiful, and they move beautifully. And, I'm so interested in the world that he creates, but almost in a mediatized way. Yeah, you're always aware that it's a construction. You're always questioning, what the relationship between this construction and the world that we live in. It always seems fantastical and imagined and kind of removed, right? Mm. And actually, it creates a world and a set of people that is very easy to look down on, and you feel that the filmmaker is kind of looking down on them, actually. Mm. Yeah. I mean, these are trailer trash, and this is the way trailer trash behaves, and it's kind of like you're watching Friedkin's idea of trailer trash through a lens, right? But actually, what people caught up in, this poverty, the struggles that they might through, the desperation that they might be driven to, I never felt that it actually connects with a real, world.
What you were saying earlier about it feeling kind of phony, I agree with. I think there is something about the way in which the world is constructed here and the characters are constructed doesn't feel honestly observed.
No. And the gothicness of it is not rooted in anything, though they attempt to root it for you. So the idea of killing your own mother should carry more emotional weight than the film gives it, even if she's a terrible mother and she's a mother, who once tried to, kill her kid or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, a better film would have asked, well, what desperation drove her to try and kill her kid? I mean, maybe she had no money to feed it. I mean, there could be, there could be reasons. But actually, the film deals with these things on such a surface level.
Well, I suppose that was kind of, in a sense, the reason, because she's clearly estranged from the mother. I mean, the only time you see her is when she's dead in the boot of the car. So, well, I'm not saying that's a good reason to kill her, but what I'm saying is, like, it obviously reflects very badly on the family that wants to do this for this $50,000 they think they're going to get, and like you're put right into the middle of that right at the start. The kid needs some money. This idea of getting Killer Joe to kill the mum is active right at the beginning, and I kind of liked, like, these aren't likable people. Even Thomas Hayden Church, the dad, who is in some respects too dim to be, really
an agent.
Yeah, really an agent. He's still not that likable because he's willing to do this. He feels like a bit of a passenger, but he's willing to do this. So I kind of didn't mind that it wasn't sort of fully fleshed out, I suppose. Like it was about the people who are willing to do this, and the fact that it doesn't matter what your mum did, really. You shouldn't be willing to offer for the life insurance, and the fact that you are is enough for me to go on with the characters right at the start. I didn't feel like I needed more about the mum.
Well, I did to take the film at a different level, because when the film begins, the part of the reason for all of this is that the oldest son had been living with her and she kicked him out. So actually, she was enough of a mother to have, a grown-up son living with her and looking after him, and so yeah. So and in any case, it doesn't matter. The thing is that, if it's all going to be fantastical and stylized and dreamlike or something, yeah, then, I think, okay, fine, right? But then don't bring other things into it, and if you're going to be bringing other things into it, then flesh them out properly, right? I mean, I think, this is a really highly stylized film, which I love. I love the look of it. I love the milieu. But for example, even the milieu, I was thinking, this is contemporary America. What is it, Oklahoma and Texas? These are like sub-proles, partly making their living out of drug dealing and so on. I really felt the lack of meth. Yeah. methamphetamine, because, you know, that's the cheap drug of choice. That's the plague on America. That's what you would have expected surrounded these people.
Yeah.
It's not mentioned at all. It's all, you know, they deal in dope. Yeah, there are dissonances, right? You feel also that it's kind of people not in touch with the material, right?
Yeah. Well, the play was from 1993. It was from before Bug, actually, which was 96. And maybe that's like something that they never thought to update, you know.
Right.
Maybe. I mean, but I think you're right.
Maybe.
It does actually. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it, but it feels like an absence. I mean, I suppose that it just kind of goes into what I felt was, as I said, phony about the setup, really.
Yes.
I mean, what I liked, I suppose I kind of put that to one side in my head and said, well, I mean, the plot moves so quickly, and there are these machinations about the $50,000 and who's going to get it, and are we going to split it, and who gets paid what, and so on and so forth. And then it turns out that the $50,000, the beneficiary isn't the daughter, it's someone else, and that becomes a whole thing. And so everything kind of happens so quickly and moves at such a lick that that's what the appeal is for me here. It's being caught up in the sort of wake, you know, and being strung along. And so the fact that it wasn't, it feels like it wants to look like it's giving you this rich picture of the underclass in Texas, and it isn't really. It feels fake. But I sort of put that to one side in favour of just going along with the characters in the story. Do you know what I mean? Like, I let it be superficial for the sake of enjoying it.
I know what you mean. I mean, the thing about the film is, I was enthralled by it again, right? So, you know, I was blown over by it upon viewing it the first time. I haven't revisited until now, you know, and, you know, it's still the things that thrilled me about it, and I emphasize thrill because I just think, you know, some of the things are absolutely great, right? And you're watching it and you think, my God, oh, it's unbelievable, wow, right? And then you finish watching it, and you think about it, and you think, oh, this is kind of cheap. Yeah, that there actually is something about the execution, the way that it looks, the way that it moves, the way that it's acted, that is vastly superior to the material. Yeah, or, you know, if it's in the material, then, you know, it hasn't been brought out by the filmmakers, right? You know, the thing begins to fall apart in your head as soon as you finish watching it. But, you know, the moment of watching it, you think, you know, it's amazing. But after you watch it, you do ask all the same questions that you ask of Friedkin, right? It's kind of icky. There's a tinge of misogyny.
A tinge.
You know, or more, yeah, more than a tinge. I mean, it's really brutal against women. You know, the girl is 12 years old. Like,
I thought you'd really pick up on that. I mean, I remember you being so offended by the treatment of I can't remember the actress, the female character in The Hateful Eight, the Tarantino film.
Yeah.
She gets beaten up left, right, and centre. You know, I thought you'd have similar objection to the Gina Gershon.
Well, I kind of did, but I didn't. And the reason why I didn't is because, you know, she is meant to be the brains of the outfit. She's the only one who knows what she's doing. Yeah, she set it all up, right? She's the bad one in the thing. So actually, you know, for her to get slapped around doesn't seem so outrageous. Yeah, it's in a way keeping with the character. And then Friedkin is very good about keeping you in that moment of tension. Is this going to happen? Oh my God, it's happening! It's happening! Yeah, and then you're caught up in the emotion of that, and you're not thinking. Yeah, but again, you know, kind of after you finish watching the film, you think, ugh, yeah, like, you know, it is misogynist and it is brutal, and the girl's 12 years old, and, you know, ugh, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird, the 12 years old thing, because Juno Temple clearly isn't, but the character says so. I mean, how old is Juno Temple? She's 31 now, so she would have been 22. So she's 10 years older than the character she's playing. If when the character says she's 12, she's telling the truth. I mean, there's something you feel like. I felt that like that's a line of dialogue that the character seemed to be in a headspace there that I couldn't quite trust what she was saying. She's in that kind of dreamy headspace at the time, so I didn't know how literally I was supposed to take that line.
I think you're meant to take it pretty literally.
Yeah. Well, if you are, it's disgusting. Yeah. But I don't know. I let it go, you know, because physically she's clearly not, and so.
Well, she's clearly not, but she's pictured as clearly being. I.e., you know, you're told about, you know, this crush that she had on this fat guy who was very nice on her, but you know, she's pictured with all her dolls and soft toys in her bed, right? Like, you know, she is treated like a little girl. Yeah, even Gina Gershon mothers her, you know, and so on. So, you know, and you're told she's 12, and nobody says no, she's not. So of course, as soon as she takes her clothes off, you see she's a grown woman. So you know, that plays, right? But I think she's meant to be 12, right?
She's certainly, as you say, sort of constructed as innocent and virginal and all of those things, and threatened kind of by sex as well. Like, well, not by sex exactly, but when Killer Joe has her to himself for the first time in the apartment, they've constructed this dinner and then they've left her to be with him, and they haven't told her. You know, she's obviously very nervous, but then I don't think that's necessarily a fear of sex. I mean, who wouldn't be nervous? No matter how old you are, even.
Yes, and but I do think you're meant to take it as a fear of sex as well. And actually the way that Killer Joe handles it is very interesting, right? And it's conscious of her being a young girl who would be afraid of sex. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like he turns around and, you know, and so on. The way that it begins with her behind him before, you know, him asking her to move in front of him. Right, like you could see that he's grooming her. Yeah. So,
I want to talk a little bit about the fried chicken stuff, because I really and I'm glad you brought up the masturbating with the crucifix from The Exorcist, because it brought that to mind for me as well. Because. I wasn't shocked by the crucifix stuff in The Exorcist.
Oh, I was.
And when we talked about The Exorcist, I kind of gave it some defense. And I was really shocked by the fried chicken stuff here. I'd forgotten about it, for one thing. And I think there's a comic aspect to it in that, you know, he's not having... He puts the fried chicken on his crotch like a fake penis and gets her to suck it. And, I mean, it's a really vile sort of thing to be doing and degrading. And the comic aspect, for me at least, is that he seems to be getting a genuine physical pleasure from it. You know, breathing hard and so on. And of course, he can't possibly be. So, like, you know, it's in his head. You know, I don't think he's acting either. Like, to me, it comes across as in his head. He is loving this and feeling it. You know, but it is disgusting and shocking and degrading what he makes it do. And so I kind of thought. I thought, what's the difference between this and the crucifix stuff, right? Because the justification that I gave, or tried to give, for the crucifix stuff is that this demon that's inside Reagan in The Exorcist is trying to get them to lose their faith. And he's trying to do the worst things possible. And it's justified in that it does that for the audience as well. It shocks you that much. And here, the fried chicken stuff feels more gratuitous than that. I felt like I was able to justify it less in terms of the story. You know, he doesn't need to be doing this to degrade her. It's fun for him. Killer Joe is so already in charge of the situation. He doesn't need to be doing this. He's already beat her in the face. He's already smacked her in the face, hasn't he? I think.
Well, but to me, you know, the point is beyond that. I mean, you know, what upset me is, you know, it's a 13 or 14-year-old girl shoving a crucifix up her vagina. I mean, you know, that alone, just the age of the young girl doing it and presenting that to an audience, I think it's obscene, really. You know, I think it's cheap and obscene. I mean, here, you know, the scene is about power and control. He's exercising power and control. He's out to humiliate her. She is being humiliated. You know, on the other hand, it is a 50-year-old actress giving a performance, which I think is different also than presenting a 13-year-old girl. Right, like I mean, to me that's a fundamental difference. You know, if it had been Gina Gershon shoving a crucifix up her vagina in The Exorcist, I wouldn't have been bothered. You know, I think it would. I thought it might have been tasteless or whatever, But, yeah, I mean, you can't get away from the fact that it's Linda Blair at 13 or something doing that.
Yeah. So
and being presented to do that. It's kind of...
So the reason I bring it up is not so we can kind of get into the weeds of the argument again, because we've already had the discussion. But I suppose I just want to, because this seems to present such a clear point of comparison with that sequence from The Exorcist, I suppose what I'm asking then is, because you talk about it being Linda Blair as opposed to Reagan, so is it the fact that he got a 13-year-old girl to do this in real, like a 13-year-old actress, and that she was asked to do this? It's not the fact that it's the character that's doing it; it's that he got an actress to do it.
Well, to me, the fundamental thing, before you even discuss story or motivation or whether it was the devil, is you're seeing a 13-year-old girl shove a crucifix up her vagina. And that's what is being presented to you. I mean, I just think that is fundamentally wrong. Yeah. I mean, people now are talking about don't post pictures of your children on Facebook playing soccer because some pedophile might be whacking off on them. Well, I mean, here is Linda Blair at 13 being presented to the whole world with her legs open. I mean, I just think it's a mistake and it's wrong. Yeah. And I know that it wasn't, that Linda Blair wasn't really doing it, but it's presented as, right? So I mean, I just think that's off the charts in terms of tastelessness and so on, really. You can twist yourself around rationalizing it the way that you want, but would you put your kid on screen doing that at 13?
Well, no, quite. I mean, when I was saying earlier, because there's something I want to slightly kind of adjust on what I was saying earlier. When I said right at the start, we haven't given Friedkin enough credit for his casting and his working with actors. I think there's some truth to that, but in terms of his working with actors, I mean, he has such a reputation for the way he treated actors, particularly on The Exorcist. And, Ellen Burstyn had kind of had back problems ever since because of a stunt where she was pulled onto the ground by a wire. And I think she complained about it and was told, okay, I'll tell him to go easier on you. And then she says, I don't think Friedkin asked the guy to go easier on me. So in terms of working with actors, that's not what I mean. No one deserves that kind of treatment. And it's odd watching The Exorcist and thinking of all the things that you would sort of want to take care of, the duty of care towards the actors you'd have these days, that is clearly sort of absent there. So what I mean when I say, works well with actors is he gets good performances out of them. Or not necessarily the way he does, but, he gets really good performances. That's kind of a side issue anyway, but we're talking about Killer Joe. And I guess it just struck me that, like I say, I found myself shocked and not offended, but kind of outraged by the fried chicken stuff here in a way that I wasn't with anything that I saw in The Exorcist.
That's interesting because I didn't quite feel that way. I mean, I thought it was powerful, and I thought it was about power relations. And I thought it was kind of interesting because obviously the husband is just there being as humiliated as the wife, though being unconscious of it. Yeah, I mean, kind of him exercising power over the wife is also exercising power over him. He is helpless, but actually he's so pissed off at her that he doesn't even care and he's not aware of the dynamics. Right. So I kind of... I thought it was kind of powerful. And, for me, Gina Gershon is such a powerful presence anyway that I didn't quite feel as outraged as you did. I actually thought it was like a great noir moment or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose maybe we saw it differently. I think maybe we saw it differently because you're talking about the outrage that you feel in The Exorcist primarily being about the actress presenting that as something that
about it being a young girl,
Yes. Whereas I think the outrage that I felt in Killer Joe was about character. It was about the character of Killer Joe doing that. That's actually what I found outrageous. Yeah,
but actually for me, that would be in keeping with the character of Killer Joe.
Oh yeah,
and
completely.
everything So
yeah, it's really fitting. It's really fitting for the film, for the character, but for me, that's where the shot came from,
Well, you see, for me, like the opening scenes always set up a tone and a milieu, and a kind of a feeling for what the rest of the film is going to be. And your introduction to Gina Gershon is her vagina. She opens the door to her trailer, and she's not wearing she's wearing a t-shirt with nothing under.
Yeah.
And actually what you see is her vagina, right? So that already sets a trajectory for the film. And actually this chicken scene is in keeping with, what you've seen from the beginning. So so I suppose I minded it less, though again, when you think through the various elements in the film in your head after watching the film, it is, it leaves something unpleasant and half-baked and, kind of, it's like these cheap shock effects, really.
Well,
like
you kind of think of it in terms of, or at least I kind of thought of it in terms of, if you gender flip some of these characters, how does it play differently? So if, for instance, the husband is the conniving one who gets beaten and maybe even forced to suck a chicken leg like Gina Gershon is, and Gina Gershon is the dumb one who's kind of caught up in the wake. Like, I mean, that wouldn't not be shocking. That would be shocking, but it wouldn't be shocking in the same way. There's a very gendered aspect to the violence.
Yes, yes.
And it doesn't feel accidental that, it's a woman who is the conniving one with the brains who ends up getting so beaten.
But likewise with a young girl, if it had been a young boy who'd been, taken as a retainer and used for sex, and you were told he was 12 years old, it would be completely unacceptable. I mean, there's something about it being done to a girl that actually makes it somehow more socially acceptable when it shouldn't be.
Yeah. Well, there's also an element of that that's played as a kind of fantasy relationship. She believes they're in love, and he believes they're in love as well. Killer Joe, like it's begun as this quote unquote retainer and this grooming sort of situation, and basically rape. And it's become, I love her, I want to marry her, I'm going to take her with me, and then they're going to have a baby together. It's like, in the most twisted way possible, the film has built a beautiful relationship.
Well, the thing is, I suppose we have to question, what is the film's intent? What does it want to do with this? What is it presenting these things to us for? Is it just meant to be a laugh? Is it meant to be a shock? Is it just meant, to be invited into this lurid fantasy world? Because maybe we're reading things that were not, there are questions to ask of a different work and not this one. So I suppose that's always like a possibility.
Well, I don't think we're reading it in terms of intent. I think we're reading it in terms of effect.
Well, but you need to read both of them together, because then you measure the effect also in relation to the intent. I mean, you can't say, oh, it's not a realist gritty drama if the intent is not to make a realist gritty drama.
No, of course.
Yeah. So I think the two things are kind of related. But I'm interested in, well, there are several things that come to me, and they're just speculation. But one of them is I begin to see a pattern of Friedkin being drawn to second-rate material. Yeah, if you see the boys in the band, it's not the greatest 20th century play. Let me tell you. If you look at The Exorcist, well, it's not the best novel. It's not even, And I'm actually wondering about these Tracy Letts things, which, on one level are obviously, a level higher than The Exorcist. But actually, when you think through Killer Joe, you do think it's kind of very pulpy and slightly cheap and so on. And then when he does get really fantastic material, like Wages of Fear, he turns it into second-rate pulpy.
Yeah.
It's my view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that's interesting about Tracy Letts is he's won the Pulitzer for drama. Not for either of these, but for August Osage County, which I've not seen. Yes. I mean, again, it was a play, and a film was made of it, directed by John Wells, I think.
I saw the film.
I mean, what did you make of the film?
I was disappointed in the film. Yeah, it was one of those all-star cast things. Yes.
So it's an interesting thing, because there is, like I said, so I've said before, I love Tracy Letts as an actor, these two screenplays, this and Bug, feel disappointing and malnourishing, or maybe malnourishing is too harsh, but not nourishing, kind of not substantial. But you've got people like William Friedkin loves him and says he's a great American playwright, and you're going, what am I missing in this material?
Yes.
That other people are seeing.
Well, we haven't seen the plays, so there might be something in the plays that's not there in the screenplays.
Yeah.
There might be something about the theatrical experience that's different from the cinematic. I mean, this is clearly almost a one-set play, right? It's got, 5 characters, and I think most of it takes place in the trailer. I mean, it might be a fantastic theatrical experience, and you don't know what's been put in and what's been put out. I mean, all I can say is that, for me, the narrative, the look, the tone of the film is incredibly seductive. You feel like your senses are awake when watching this film, right? And then after you watch it, your mind takes over and you begin to find fault, is my...
Yeah.
So if I can describe my experience of watching and thinking about this, right? So,
seductive is a great word, because that's what I thought about McConaughey as well, and I think there seems to be a strategy of deploying the McConaughey that as the rom-com guy, and he was I think he was People Magazine's sexiest man in the world in 2005.
Man alive.
Sexiest man alive, yeah. So he's the sex symbol, and he's deployed in a seductive way here. The way it's his acting style. Yeah. He kind of slithers about sets, and he's obviously an awful person, but you like him, you're drawn to him. There's something magnetic that we were saying. And
the film displays him. I mean, he's got this incredible nude scene. Yeah, I mean, this is a film where, he takes not only his shirt off, but everything, really, right? So,
yes.
Kind of, that's not to be discounted, i.e., what you expect of McConaughey in a rom-com is deployed here, to a noir effect.
Yeah, well, and the fried chicken thing is deeply sexual, not in a very nice way, but, he is sexually active in that scene, getting turned on, getting quite steamy.
And the scene with a 12-year-old, which turns the whole rom-com star persona on its head. I mean, in a different context, if the film had been worse than it is, and maybe even still now, actually, this could have been the film that he chose knowingly that would prevent him from ever making a romantic comedy again, because whenever you think of him sexually, you'd always think of the chicken and the 12-year-old. Yeah. So actually, it's a very risky role for McConaughey, which I think give him credit, really.
Has he made a rom-com since? I'm not sure that he has. Well, I mean, he's made some very interesting films since. Like I say, this was 2011, and I think this kind of kicked off his revival. There was Mud, Magic Mike and the Paperboy in 2012. 2013.
I love Mud.
Yeah, I know you love Mud. I fell asleep in Mud.
Yeah, I saw it 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
I was meant to write on it and never got around to it. I love the Paperboy.
I haven't seen that. I think I would like it though.
It's really sleazy and funny.
Exactly. Nicole Kidman's in it, right? I always thought it looks interesting.
Yeah, she's in it.
Dallas Buyers Club after that, and The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013. Interstellar in 2014, which is not a deep dark film, but neither is it a rom-com. The Sea of Trees, I don't know.
I don't know that. Never heard of it.
Sea of Trees. It's a drama mystery by Gus Van Sant. The Free State of Jones.
Oh.
Free State of Jones I quite enjoyed, despite the fact I think if I watched it again now I'd probably find all sorts of problems. Maybe I had problems with it at the time, but I thought it was interesting. It's about... have you seen it?
No.
It's about a place in the mid-1800s, I think, in America that kind of declares itself free and that slaves can be free there.
Uh-huh.
And there's a great scene where they're voting and all these people line up to have their vote, led by Matthew McConaughey, who's the kind of main guy. And they all have their votes, and then you see the tally come up and it's like they've had 12 votes. They've just not been counted. Great scene. There's a couple of voice things he did in kids' films. Gold, I don't know. A crime drama. The Dark Tower we saw. He's the villain in that. White Boy Rick, a crime drama again. Serenity, fantasy mystery.
I think I did see Serenity.
The Beach Bum, a stoner comedy. Oh, he's back to that again. Oh, Harmony Korine. Between Two Ferns, the movie, he just plays himself. And The Gentleman, which is the last thing we saw him in, where he played the American gangster in London.
Which I liked. I remember liking The Gentleman.
Yeah, we certainly liked him in it.
Yeah. So,
it seems like his rom-com days are behind him so far. It'd be interesting to see if he goes back to it.
So, to me, and I'm just kind of speaking about my own feelings and thoughts, and so on about the film, I kind of put this together with To Live and Die in LA and Jade. Okay. Yeah. In that, there are many things in all of them that I have problems with, more in Jade, actually, than any of the others. And yet, it's a film that I can see myself watching it again, and more than once. Yeah?
Yes.
So I think kind of the criticisms that I make of it, which I stand by, I do think it's kind of cheap and lurid in the worst sense, and that the filmmakers are way beyond the material that is being dramatized for us. I stand by all of that, and yet there is something about the lighting and the camera moving, the decor, and the way that it all moves together, and the actors and so on, that really draws you into this material, and keeps you interested and kind of alive to what it's offering until the end of the film. And then the paradox is that then once you begin to piece it together, you think, oh, this is a bit, cheap and...
Yeah. Afterwards, you kind of feel the appeal has been skin deep. And that doesn't feel that satisfying. But I think you're right. I think we're both agreed that we're not that satisfied with the screenplay.
Yes.
But the performances and the filmmaking do elevate it. The performances certainly do. We haven't really talked about the filmmaking so much, I suppose.
Well, that's almost like something I want to go back to the film for, because I do think the cinematography, and I looked it up. I was so interested. It's Caleb Deschanel, right? Very famous cinematographer who's also directed. He's a great cinematographer, and my God, you can see it in this. Yeah, it's kind of, the lighting and is beautiful. The way that focus is used to kind of bring certain things in and kind of keep certain things almost, out of focus is fantastic. So yeah.
So, as this is the last of the Friedkin season, our Friedkin season,
yes.
how do we bring this all together? What are the lessons that we've learned about William Friedkin from these 7 or 8 films?
Well, for me, kind of part of my interest actually began through Boys in the Band and Cruising, and having discussions with queer academics, both pro and con. Some people finding Boys in the Band very offensive and dark and so on. So what I've learned is that darkness permeates everything else, right? What I've also learned is that the cheapness of the material, which is actually, I want to qualify that, because it's almost like material that this wins awards or, is a hit off Broadway, but actually it isn't of the very greatest kind. It isn't of the deepest or the richest. It's kind of, second-rate material, really. Successful, but second-rate. That you begin to see kind of a pattern of. The discussions that I had on Cruising, which was, the intent to shock, So actually, you begin to think, oh, well, he's not really homophobic. I mean, he is misanthropic. He never gives the audience, a happy ending or pleasure or this, this interest in, S&M kind of, there's a fisting scene in Cruising. it really is kind of what he's interested in. You see it manifest in different ways, like, throughout his career. I mean, a vagina in a 12-year-old girl, Gina Gershon with a drumstick here. You begin to see kind of a pattern of of things. He's great with a camera. He's great in motion. He can certainly kind of set up a scene, line up a scene like beautifully. The films are glossy, very pleasurable, always rich production values, that are a great pleasure on its own, and actually one I miss more and more. The thing about digital, I think, has made people careless, with the the pleasures of like depth and texture and construction of images and what they can do. So I love all of that. But it's also kind of confirmed my view that he, I haven't loved any of his films. So I've been interested in all of them and they've drawn me, but kind of the material doesn't speak to me on a personal level. And yet there's other material that doesn't speak to me on a certain level, but I feel I learn from, or that maybe I'm not up to the level of the filmmaker. But none of that with this. I actually think it satisfied me that he's like a very skillful technician, but doesn't rank with the Coppolas and so on.
You don't feel he's underrated or underappreciated in the annals of film history?
No, I don't. I think he's rated just right.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about his work that, although I think I said in a previous podcast, it doesn't always feel like he wants you to have a good time. I think he always wants to please his audience, even if that pleasure is sort of, the pleasure that you feel from being shocked, or the pleasure that you feel from having a bad time or experience something taboo. The audience is always in his head.
Yes, but not in a good way. So I think the audience is always on his head, but he's got a disdain for the audience. He thinks he can manipulate them easily. He's constantly directing for effects. Yeah. He often goes for the cheapest and most extreme effect, and he never leaves the audience happy. I think there's a disdain, to end films the way that he does. So actually, I think that's a really great way of putting it. He's always conscious of the audience, but I don't think he's got much respect for it.
It brings me back to something that I always think about. I think I've mentioned a number of times on the podcast, that my brother told me about J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams is always saying on set, apparently, "Is this delightful?" And the effect that happens is, in the moment, everything that you see in his films is lovely and delightful and you enjoy it, and then afterwards, empty. And it's as though you can imagine Friedkin on set going, "Is this shocking and spectacular and crazy?" Like, it has to be in the moment. And then afterwards, empty.
Yes. There is something unsatisfying about the work, and particularly so when seen collectively. There are definitely patterns that come out, and not to his advantage. And I think it's kind of interesting to see a film both, in its own terms, right, and then in relation to what else was out, which we've done when we talked about To Live and Die in LA. But then also to see it kind of collectively, the works of this director, are their patternings. And I think, the French Connection and The Exorcist were his biggest hits. And, kind of, we enjoyed both of them, but also found, very considerable faults, I think, in both. Though admittedly, you see, the other thing to add to this is that these films are now 40, 50 years old, right? Yeah. So, and we're watching them and discussing them, right? So they have something, right, that means they continue to be watched and discussed, right? So I happen to think that it's not enough, right? So again, it's in keeping with these patterns that I feel about him, that you know, he is a great technical director, but I don't think he's done any film that is absolutely great. Yeah, yet it's skillful enough, or it made such an impact, or it's of sociological interest or historical interest enough that it continues to be seen. Yeah, and often with the same problems discussed over and over again as in a broken record, and I would include The Exorcist in that. Right.
Mm. Lovely.
Well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Do you have any last thing you want to say?
Last thing I want to say is I think if you remember Thomas Hayden Church, it's from Sideways or Spider-Man 3 where he played Sandman. Those would be the biggest roles.
Ah, yes. Now I do remember him, yes.
Yeah, there you go. That's the last thing I want to say.